and thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Barry McCann and I'm the founder and CEO of Youth STEM 2030, a non-profit that empowers youth globally to use science, technology, engineering and maths, or STEM, to change the world for the better and achieve the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So at Youth STEM 2030, we really believe that while STEM is often seen as just, sorry. I don't know why I'm getting so thinking about it. It was
so close.
Oh, it's how I know it doesn't matter because of the introduction. I want to get it right. Oh, right, sorry.
I feel bad for whoever has to go through this. They're gonna think, oh yeah, this is it. They're gonna start
You need to tell them that need to cut off.
We need this recording.
Right, we're gonna try again. Oh,
how many minutes is a bit?
Breathe,
All right.
Yeah.
Right, whatever happens from this point, we are going for it, and I'll try and stop being the bad one. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Barry McCann and I'm the founder and CEO of Youth STEM 2030, a non-profit that empowers youth globally to use science, technology, engineering and maths, or STEM, to change the world for the better and achieve the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So here at Youth STEM 2030, we believe that STEM is vital to solving some of the big challenges that we currently face, like the climate crisis, poverty, inequalities and more. And crucially, youth can be at the forefront of those solutions. So today I'm really excited to be joined by some of our volunteers from around the world to focus on three main things. We'll each share our experiences of using STEM to make a difference, some of the challenges of being a young person in STEM, and also share our advice for other young people who want to get involved and make a difference through STEM. So thank you so much, Catherine, Lucy, Alvina and Tashinga for joining us today. Would you like to each take a little minute to introduce yourself? So Catherine, do you want to go first?
Yeah, for sure. So hi everyone, my name is Catherine and I'm a 17-year-old from Canada. I'm in my second year of medical sciences at Western. I really got involved with STEM through science fair. So medicine and STEM has always been a really big part of my life. But outside of STEM, I'm really passionate about music. I play the piano. I also really like volunteering and I advocate for mental health. I'm part of the design team for Youth STEM 2030 and I'm really, really passionate about supporting youth, and so I'm really excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm from the UK. I study biochemistry at university and I first got into biochem because I liked looking at the chemical underlying reactions behind biological processes. Specifically, I'm interested in genetics and neuroscience. I like to bake in my free time. Stress baking is a big part of my routine now, especially around exam season. And I like advocating for STEM representation in underrepresented communities where there are limited resources for them to explore STEM. Like Catherine, I am part of the Youth STEM Summit design team, and I also act as a life sciences reviewer for Youth STEM 2030.
Hey everyone, I'm Alvina and I'm 16 from the UK. I'm currently doing my A-levels and I study biology, chemistry and maths, and I aim to go into molecular biology in the future. In my spare time, I like swimming and I like playing the guitar and singing. So like Lucy, I am a life sciences reviewer at Youth STEM 2030, and I am particularly passionate about women empowerment, specifically for the youth.
Hello guys, my name is Tashinga. I'm a 14-year-old student from Zimbabwe. I've competed in a lot of science fairs. I'm particularly very passionate about solving issues surrounding hunger and poverty inside my community. In my free time, I love writing short stories, poetry, watching football, and reading books in a really good book. And as part of the Youth STEM 2030 team, I'm a science communication editor, which really allows me to merge both of my interests in STEM and writing stories.
Wonderful, thank you all so much. And it's really great to have such an awesome group here today on this webinar. So I think that it probably makes sense for us to start with how each of us got started in STEM, because I know that we've all had quite different ways that we've got into STEM. So Lucy, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. So I got into biochemistry purely because I really like genetics. But I actually didn't know it was a real subject until I did some of my own Googling, because when I was in school, they sort of rigidly taught us biology and chemistry, but not the intermixing of those two subjects. So I did my own research, and I also got really interested in science communication, which is why I'm part of Youth STEM 2030, because I think that giving young people a platform on which they can communicate is really important. So yeah.
And Catherine, I know that you had a bit of a different experience to Lucy, so would you be able to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually got started a lot earlier in primary school, where one of my teachers actually told me about science fair in my community. So I started off with regional science fair, and since then I've competed in national science fairs and international science fairs. And I've really learned a lot about all sorts of different parts of STEM. I've done engineering projects and different health projects. So that's really made me realize how big of a field STEM is and how many opportunities there are for youth that want to be involved.
Tashinga, you've also done some science fair and various projects in STEM. So how does Catherine's experience of getting involved initially compare to yours?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I was also involved in science fairs the same way as Catherine was in primary school. So basically the way I got into science was I was really interested in seeing how things worked, and also seeing how different aspects of STEM could be applied into everyday problems and creating those same solutions. So the same way Catherine has, I started going for regional science fairs, going to national science fairs, and then going on into international science fairs. And it really helped me a lot because I got to know myself in terms of how I could actually solve problems around me by taking aspects of things that I learned inside STEM. And also being a huge part of educating other young people, communicating with other young people in terms of STEM has also helped me a lot. So yes.
And Alvina, I know that that's quite different to your experience, where you hadn't come across many of those opportunities before.
Yeah, so similar to Catherine, I actually had a teacher quite recently recommend writing an article for Youth STEM Matters, and I was immediately intrigued by how many opportunities there were for particularly young people, which is quite difficult to find at a young age. And I decided that I wanted to apply for the executive team, which is why I'm here as a life sciences reviewer today. And I got interested in science through actually reading, which was also recommended by my teacher, and magazines like The Biologist and other How Science Works magazines, which sort of led me to realize that molecular biology was my passion. And from there, I've just mainly been reading through things and realizing that there's quite a few opportunities, however small they are, that led me to, into science.
Yeah, and I can relate to like bits of what each of you have said. And that at first, I just kind of did science at school, did the curriculum, but didn't really go beyond that. So it was like the chance to do a placement during the summer holidays, now 4 years ago now, that really changed kind of my perception of what STEM was. So what advice would you give to other young people who want to get started in STEM, like take it beyond the textbook, but are not quite sure where to begin?
I guess I can kind of start with that. With science fair and with research, if that's taught me anything, it's that a lot of it is definitely self-directed. As long as you have that willingness to learn and you have that passion for science, I think that you can really take it in any direction you want. I didn't have a lot of resources when I first started, I was doing projects in my backyard or in my garage, and then I eventually moved on to labs later on. But I think it's really important to know that you don't need to have a lot of resources or anything to get started, as long as you have something that you're interested in pursuing and a question you want answered. That's the biggest part of getting involved.
Just adding
Yeah.
on to Catherine's. Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. You could continue.
Just adding on to Catherine's point. So I didn't have any science fair experience. There were a lot of opportunities around me, but I never got onto any of those stages. And what I learned from that is that it was really easy to compare yourself to other people, especially when you see them pursuing their own careers and you're thinking, why aren't I accelerating as fast as they are? So it's really easy for a young person to fall into that trap of thinking. But I would say to them, take your time and explore, because even though I didn't have that sort of science fair experience, I am still lucky enough to be here today. And I did that through my own exploration of my subject and looking around for opportunities. Opportunities come even when you're not really looking for them. You can find them. Just have an open mind about it and do a bit of reading, and you'll actually find yourself in places that you didn't think you could end up in.
Sure. And adding from what Lucy said about enlightening yourself and, being open to experiences, because it's not every opportunity that's just going to come straight at you. I'm taking it from a perspective of getting into an opportunity and taking it forward and really working hard afterwards. I feel that sometimes when you do a project or when you pursue something, there may be a point where you don't think you've gotten what you really wanted from it. So as Lucy said, a lot of young people are going to rush to wanting to compare themselves to another person, like trying to compare why they're not going as fast as the next person, why their own careers are not accelerating. But then the thing is, each person has got a different step towards their own journey. We're all having different ways of growing, and we're all going to grow at different paces. So you never compare yourself to another person. Just explore yourself and be willing to just enlighten yourself, read, and just be an open-minded person.
I would say having inspiration. So you can really get inspiration from anywhere. For me, it was my teachers, and particularly my biology teacher, who actually recommended books to me. And within those books and magazines, you can find points within STEM, because STEM is a huge subject, but there are specific things that really interest you. And those are things which you realize that those are your passion. And so I'd say having your own sort of drive, similar to what everyone else has said, and inspiration actually leads to you finding out where your passion lies within STEM.
Yeah, and I would agree, particularly with what all of you have said, and particularly on the point of, like, it's not always that there is an opportunity that you're aware of that somebody else has created, but sometimes it is creating your own opportunities to make a difference. And some of the best, going back to what Catherine said about science fair, some of the best projects that I've seen both as a participant and judge, and some of them have been the ones that have been in people's back gardens, have been in the local park, or have been done with like really limited equipment, but that's what's made them really good and really effective. I think sometimes we kind of forget that actually having those constraints on you can sometimes make you find more creative solutions within STEM. So kind of moving on then, what do you think it is that makes somebody a scientist or an engineer or a mathematician or a technologist, or any of the intersections of those? What is it that makes somebody, what kind of characteristics is it that makes somebody those things?
I can start off. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Sure, Lucy, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd say curiosity was one of the main ones, because that's the main driving force behind what you want to do. And curiosity really leads to you you know, as I've said before, realizing what your passion is and realizing whether you actually want to do STEM. As Mari said, there are a lot of subsections within STEM. It's a huge field with a lot of opportunities, and finding out where you want to go in that is actually one of the most difficult tasks, because you think you want to do something and you realize it's something else. So I'd say curiosity and a drive to actually find out where you fit within STEM is very important for a researcher or an engineer or anyone within STEM.
I absolutely agree with that, especially about the curiosity point, because science really is just about learning as you go and you carry on asking these sorts of questions. For me, I think that communication is the most important, because working in a team is really crucial for science. Not only are you working with multidisciplinary collaboration, but also like on the smallest scale with your lab partner in a lab, or maybe on a small startup team or in a non-profit organization. You'll have to speak with these people and communicate the reason why you care about this area of science to basically everyone you meet. So having those communication skills is really important.
I feel a really good scientist should be very detail oriented and should also be very persistent, because there are a lot of things when you're doing your experiments, a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of things can go wrong. But then it takes someone who's very persistent to keep on going back and trying to figure out what exactly went wrong. And also being very detail oriented. You have to always be the type of person who looks into those really small details in everything and making sure that all those things are set up that way. I feel that's really important when you're a scientist, to be very detail oriented and persistent.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all of those. The biggest thing for me is just having that open-mindedness and willingness to learn, because you can't ask the big questions or make hypotheses or do research if you think that you already have the right answer. The whole point of science, and why I'm so passionate about science, is that there's so many unknowns. And so I think that if you embrace that and you're open to those new possibilities and those new advancements, then that's where you can really set yourself apart and make those big discoveries.
Yeah, those are also important. And I think I almost want to answer the question with what a scientist isn't, because I think that too often we are told that scientists are people who have lots of degrees or have a really academic background, but they aren't necessarily. And especially, you know, given the work that we do at Youth STEM 2030, I think it's so important to emphasise that there's not an age limit on doing STEM. You're never too young or too old either to do STEM. So I think that that's a really important thing to kind of connect with all of what you've said, because those are all really, I think, key parts of being a scientist. And I guess that leads us into what it's like being a young person in STEM, because sometimes you aren't taken as seriously as you should be because of your age. So I was wondering if anybody had experienced, or maybe knew of others who had experienced, any sort of like barriers to being involved in STEM, either because of your age or because of something else. And if anybody would like to share those.
I can go first. So age is a really interesting one, because I feel like, as you said, Vari, sometimes it is difficult to be taken seriously in certain situations. But also you are surrounded by people who you know will become the next generation of scientists, and that's quite inspiring. So a lot of my lecturers will end their lectures saying, we don't know the answers to these questions yet, but someone in this room will. And you get the sense that you're part of something that changes people, right? So I always think that that's a good thing to look forward to. I'm thankful enough to have not experienced any barriers in my life personally, but I know of people who have had to face sexism in the workplace, for example. I know that some engineering subjects are incredibly male heavy, for example. The ratio isn't as balanced as it should be, and there is a lot of debate as to whether or not as to how we should tackle the problem. So yeah, unfortunately there are barriers to be faced.
So I completely agree with what Lucy said, and I actually have faced, even though they're really minor barriers, but I'd say for age, often you're thought of as quite incompetent in order to do things in laboratories. For example, my own form room within school, we're not allowed in without supervision because they think we will set the room on fire or something. But obviously, we know that we wouldn't, but they don't. And that's why I feel like often in laboratory work experiences or other actual organizations, they don't take in many young people, which is why it's quite hard to find experience. And that's why Youth STEM 2030 was one of the things that intrigued me a lot, because it was for 14 to 22-year-olds. And I was like, wow, that's something that you don't find often for someone to cater for such a young age group. So I'd say that maybe it's that adults don't trust us enough, or maybe it's that we haven't proven ourselves. But I genuinely think that for young people, it is quite difficult to get into STEM.
Yeah. Just like what Alvina said, yes, age can be a really huge factor. I remember not being taken seriously because of my age. Like, it's something that I continually have to face. People won't really take you seriously when you're a young person who wants to be getting engaged into certain activities. They're like, what? You know, you want to do this and that, and then you're not given that huge responsibility to be actually taking care of things that you're doing at the moment, and you're not taken seriously. And also, being a woman in the STEM field can also be a huge barrier by itself. I haven't really faced that much of discrimination, but it's all been some really subtle experiences that you can just feel, just like what Lucy mentioned earlier, that the ratio isn't that, you know, it's top heavy men in that field, and you can get in there, you notice that it's all men all over and stuff like that, and that really has to change. So you really notice those type of things. You notice that maybe because of your age, people are not going to take you seriously. You notice that because of your gender, people might not think you're competent enough to be pursuing these type of activities. So I would say age and gender can also be two barriers for people trying to pursue a STEM career.
Yeah, Tashinga, I completely agree with that, because I've been blessed, as I think we all have, to have organizations like Youth STEM 2030 that's really focus on having opportunities for youth to be involved in STEM and help others be involved in STEM. But not everyone has had those opportunities. And especially as a young woman in STEM, it's very easy to be intimidated by the lack of role models, because you see male professors and male engineers, and you think that that's not something that you can aspire to do. And so the biggest thing that I would have to say about that is that we can't and we should not continue to allow those sort of barriers to be present in STEM, because you can't make those big discoveries if you've alienated half of the population, either for being too young or for being a woman. You have to rely on their experiences as well to make sure that you have a sort of holistic picture when you're doing research and when you're trying to ultimately help people.
I think that's so important. What you were saying there, Catherine, because too often we focus only on people's. I feel that there's two different types of experience by education, which is what most people traditionally associate with being experienced, but also experience by the experience that's been lived by people. And obviously, if we don't get that full diversity of lived experience, then how will we find the best solutions? You know, we're talking about the big challenges in the world, so it's so important that systemic changes are made for hopefully that by the time that our generation are the ones that are kind of, you know, in those senior positions, that it will be a more equitable and equal place. So I guess thinking sort of a bit further along those lines, how important do you think it is that young people are involved in those conversations about anything that's related to STEM? You know, we're part of the world too, and there's a lot of young people in the world. but how important do you think it is that we get meaningfully included in those decisions that are being made, whether it's about the technologies that we use or to do with climate, the climate emergency, or if it's to do with things that are perhaps more relevant to us than they might be to older people. You know, if somebody's making an app that wants to help young people's mental health, surely it makes sense to speak to young people. So how important do you think it is that young people are really involved, not just in doing STEM, but also in the kind of decision making that surrounds STEM?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's a lot of untapped potential in young people. Like if we're able to harness all that knowledge, all that power, all that decision making that youth have, we'll be having so much potential to do so many things. I feel it's a really important aspect of actually bringing young people into the conversation, because we all have different experiences, we all have different backgrounds, and we all have different ways of thinking, and it's all new, it's all fresh, it's just a new, entirely different perspective. So bringing young people into that type of conversation, it actually has a lot of untapped potential that we can actually tap into, taking the world into a better space, and we could actually solve problems much more faster.
I absolutely
On to that.
everything. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
It's all right, Lizzie, go on.
I was just going to add on to the fact that yeah, it's a two-way street really, because we need to have youth have more of a voice, because as you said, Barry, lots of things in science and STEM do affect young people and they deserve a say in that. But also, I feel like some of the barriers for young people, their attitudes towards STEM is most likely that they think that whatever they say doesn't really matter in the first place, because they're not going to be heard. And I think if we allow them a platform to communicate more freely, then they would better understand the impact that they can have and how strong it can be if they work together on something. Because they'll give fresh perspectives like every other voice does, and they are as equally important as the older, more experienced people in the field.
Adding on to what Tashinga said at the beginning, we are the future, right? We're going to be living in a world where crises are coming every day. So we have, global warming, pollution, so many different issues, and we're going to have to be the ones to solve them. So obviously harnessing our power, everyone's different ways of thinking, is really important, considering we're going to have to solve the problems in the future. So why stop a lot of people from giving ideas simply because we think they're incompetent? So yeah, I think agreeing with what Lucy said, having a platform for young people to discuss things is really important.
Yeah, and Alvina, just adding on to what you said about youth being the future, and that just kind of reminded me of what Lucy was talking about earlier, about being a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that's so important, because it's not just about youth being involved in STEM, it's about the youth that will follow us being involved, because, for example, these big problems like hunger and poverty and the climate emergency, they're not going to be fixed by one generation. It's going to be a multi-generational effort to have the scientists and the engineers and the future doctors be able to kind of mitigate this sort of issue. And so the biggest thing is that it's not just about them being involved in STEM, it's about them gaining the skills through STEM, like critical thinking and creativity, to be able to face those problems later on.
I think that you all sort of like transitioned like really nicely to that kind of end point. I think that it's not just about, oh, let's do biology at school or go and do it after school, but actually it is about those problems that everybody is impacted by in the world. Not always equally, not always the same, but to some extent. And we are seeing that right now with the coronavirus. And young people have been stepping up as a big part of lots of those solutions. So I think that, sort of going back to what you were saying, Tashinga, that untapped potential, the sooner we realise that the better really for everybody, not just for young people, but actually for the generations that might actually be stopping us from getting involved right now. So if young people are, I think we all agree, really important and deserve kind of a seat at the table in STEM. But how can, let's kind of take that further as to how can young people actually make that difference? How do they get started? Or what's one way? There's lots of ways.
I think you just need to focus on a problem that really matters to you. So take a look at your daily life and what bothers you the most, and try and think of a different angle to take it. Oftentimes you'll find that STEM solutions are not always the most straightforward. Some subjects that you think don't involve STEM at all actually do have relevance to STEM. So in keeping with what everybody else has already mentioned before, reading about STEM and how you can get more involved that way is a really good place to start. And I mean, even if you don't have the current resources where you are, there are always people you can reach out to and talk to. And I think spreading through word of mouth is also a really effective way of doing it. Yeah, so just keep an open mind and keep curious, I think, is the most important thing.
Yes, and I'd add that keeping your options open. So never narrowing down one thing, reading, doing as much as you can, personal research in order to find where you fit into STEM. So not having a solid career path, because often you realize that you're passionate about things that you didn't even have in mind before. And also tiny experiences can really change things for you. For example, when I came into Youth STEM Matters, I realized when I read a article on immunofluorescence that it was really interesting, and it was one of the things that I was particularly intrigued by, whereas before I was completely determined to go into genetics. So you'll realize that even the tiniest experiences can be very important in changing your future or deciding what you're passionate about.
And I think just adding on to that is, like what Lucy said, constantly just keep asking questions about the world around you. Don't be intimidated and don't be okay with the status quo. You can't do research if you're not looking for ways to improve what already exists. So the biggest thing for me is just think critically about the world and look critically upon the world in a way where you're thinking, what can I do to improve this situation? Or how can I make life easier either for myself or for a certain group of people? And I think just having that connection to people, looking at problems and seeing what needs to be solved, and then asking those questions based on that, that is really the biggest thing that you can do to really further your future in STEM.
Yeah, and taking on from what both Catherine and Lucy said, identifying those problems inside your community and then acting upon them in a very creative manner and finding different solutions to problems inside your community. It also starts with the way you feel about yourself. Because if you're not going to believe that your voice matters, what you do matters, then I don't think much can come out of it. It all starts with you first knowing how to believe in yourself and knowing that you can actually do something. And then from that, looking around you, because there are lots and lots of things that you can actually be doing out there. It just needs a person who's creative, a person who's willing to open up their mind to new experiences. So you first start with yourself. You first try to believe in yourself. And then afterwards, you go around looking for solutions to those problems around you. And sometimes it may not be really straightforward, like what Lucy said, but then you always have to take a very creative approach to everything in STEM. So yeah.
I really like how much in this conversation the word creative's coming up, because often it's seen as STEM is very rigid and then the creative things are somewhere else over there. But actually it's like so key to STEM. And I think that shows in the solutions that young people are coming up with in STEM. There's young people who've realised that, oh, there's nobody who looks like me who is doing computer science, right? So I'm going to go and start doing workshops for girls to get them into coding. Or there's young people who are using, their voice to be able to make a difference in STEM. There's young people who are doing more practical projects. There's so many different ways of making a difference in STEM that we don't have time to talk about them all in this webinar, but there are so many out there. So I think that then, Lucy and Tashinga, I would like to pick up on a point that you both mentioned about an issue that finding an issue that you care about, and I'd be sort of curious, more than anything, to hear what is it that each of you care about. It can be something big and broad, like the fact that we are in a climate emergency, or it could be something really specific that, for example, you care about making life better for young people who might have a limb difference, and you want to make sure that they feel proud of that. So what are your kind of things that you care about, no matter what, how specific or how broad it is?
I think we've already kind of touched upon it, but one broad topic that I'm really interested in is how we can bring resources to underdeveloped communities to allow them to get more involved in STEM, because there's a sort of stereotype that science is only for the people who have the education to do it. Whereas I think now, by this point in the conversation, we've already established that STEM should be available for anyone who cares to explore it. So yeah, a broad topic that I'm interested in is just allowing people to have a voice through me, for me to represent my small area of the community and let their voices be heard. And I think a rabbit hole that I've recently gotten into is biophysics. I don't know if this is strictly relevant, but I've really been interested in the biophysics behind certain proteins that are involved in things like dementia, because these sorts of age-related diseases affect such a large part of our population, and there is currently no cure to them. And I think some greater awareness of the kinds of situations that older people can be in. For example, they can be immunocompromised. They are very vulnerable, especially in the pandemic. Mental health is also something that's not really looked into in relation to dementia, and I feel like it should be touched upon more. And as I said before, yeah, the biochemical, biophysical aspect of it is always fascinating to me.
I've always been interested in tackling hunger and poverty, especially inside my own community. I've seen how the climate crisis has impacted a lot of people's daily lives. It's such a huge problem that, it's just all over. It's just hunger and poverty. So I've always been trying to educate myself, trying to get involved with different people, trying to actually be actively involved in trying to solve those problems. And also educating people, like what Lucy said, because a lot of people out there aren't really that much knowledgeable about things going on around them. Or you take, for example, some people don't really know about what's really going on with the climate crisis. It's always been a passion of mine to be able to impart that same knowledge into other people, because if we're all going to be living without that same knowledge, or without that same view on the important things happening right now, then I don't see how, as a whole community, people can go forward without that type of knowledge. So it's always been important to me to educate people on current situations that are going on right now. Yeah.
So mine's quite specific, actually, contrary to the both of you. But since I went to the Paralympics in 2012, I was, well, not fascinated by disabilities, obviously, but I thought disabilities was quite a wide topic, and it really made me sad. So I looked in, that was one of the things that actually got me interested in genetics. And often these people were born with disabilities that things like changing DNA and other aspects of STEM that are actually now being developed can change. So I'd say one of the things that I'm curious about is how to affect DNA or change and manipulate DNA in order to eradicate disability altogether, or in order to help things like literally just people who, lack in certain aspects of physical body and stuff. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm interested in.
Mine is a little bit similar to Lucy's in that mental health has always been really important to me, and not just from the sense of just the biological aspects of mental health, but also the more psychological and human aspects of it. Neurodegeneration and neuroscience has always been really important to me because I've had family members suffer from mental health related disorders, Alzheimer's, dementia. Those are all things that I've personally had family members experience, and they're really just horrible, debilitating diseases. And so being able to contribute to the research on how to improve their quality of life and improve their quality of care is something that's not only pushed me to hopefully become a physician later on, but just be involved with that research to educate people on what these diseases are and how they can help improve.
Well, those are all like really, I think, quite different in some ways, but also there is the common link that it is the things that you care about or you're particularly interested in, and in many cases it's been because that either you or somebody close to you did experience something, and I think that's always a good place for young people to start if they're not sure where to start making a difference. Think about what has affected your life or somebody that you know's life, and find a solution to it. It could be a big problem, it could be a small problem. I think somebody was saying earlier about science doesn't happen with individuals, it's always teams. So, you're never going to solve the entire problem yourself, but you can sure do a bit towards it. And I think that for me, the kind of things that I think are of real interest within STEM, the issues that I kind of want to make a difference to is to do with youth in STEM, which kind of is probably stating the obvious based on what we do at Youth STEM 2030, and also kind of the ethics side of things, because that's really important, I think, in terms of, how do we make the decisions about what science is okay to do and what science isn't okay to do, and who's at those decision-making tables? If it's decided without the people that it impacts the most, then is the decision really going to be the right one for everybody, or just the right one for the people that have the power? So I do think there's quite a long way for STEM to go, and that feeds back to the fact that there's a long way for society to go. STEM is not immune from the kind of biases and the kind of inequalities of society. But yeah, so that's the kind of areas that I'm interested in, I guess a bit more overarching. So we've talked a lot about, how you all got into STEM, and then a bit about any kind of challenges that you faced and how you might have overcame them. But as the kind of final question, what would be your top piece of advice for a young person who wants to get involved in STEM in any way at all, who wants to make a difference to those issues that they care about? What would you tell them if you could only tell them one thing?
I think the biggest thing I would say is don't be afraid if you don't have specific role models that you can look up to, or the resources to do certain things, because they will appear if you can make the opportunity, and if you have that passion, it will eventually work out, I think. But it's so important for people to know that you do not have to be in a big university lab. You don't need to have all the expensive equipment and the big teams to do this. You can start yourself with the things that you have and your ideas, and then eventually people will appreciate that and you will be able to grow it into something bigger. But don't be afraid to start off with the little things, and then eventually the big things will come if you are passionate.
Yeah, adding on to what Catherine said, take as much as you can from every tiny experience, because even things that you often think aren't related to STEM can lead you to find your passions or find things that you're interested in. So yeah, like Catherine said, even things that are tiny or you may think are not of any importance can often lead to big things.
Don't be afraid of making mistakes, because mistakes always happen. Sometimes you may mess up in something that you've been trying to do, but then you never try to let that particular experience haunt you for the rest of your life. I've seen a lot of people make the same mistake all over and over again. Like that's actually the biggest thing that's bigger than the mistake that you make. Trying to make that mistake ruin everything else that you're going to do. You're just supposed to learn from whatever mistakes that happened and build on from that and start afresh, because that's what happens. Mistakes are bound to happen, but then the only thing that's going to actually stop you from doing what you want to do is your reaction to making that mistake. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just go ahead straight into it. And what happens will happen, but then you're going to try to solve that later. But don't be afraid of making mistakes, because usually if you're afraid to make mistakes, you won't do anything. You won't have the courage to pursue anything.
I think you should try and get involved in STEM communities as much as possible. So even if you don't think that there are resources in your country, organizations like Youth STEM are international and they have a greater reach beyond just a single country. I personally have grown a lot as a scientist, I think, because I've been inspired by the people around me, not only by Veri herself, but by the people I see every day in uni who are just doing great things. And sometimes you can feel very demotivated, as Tashinga said, when you make mistakes or you fail. But these sorts of people, they get back up again, and you find your strength through them as well. So it's always good to be part of a community where you know you're within a group of like-minded individuals. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that coming back to what some of you said earlier about picking what you care about and asking for help, and I think that well earlier we did talk about sometimes being young means that you sometimes don't get taken seriously. I think that age can be also your biggest advantage, your biggest asset, because then you can surprise people, and people are willing to help a lot of the time. The number of times that I've thought, oh goodness, I don't know if I should email that person, but actually they've been so willing to help is probably more than I can count on my hands. So that way of picking something that you care and then running with it, I think, to make that difference that you want to see in the world. And I think that what Lucy was saying there about having people around you that they don't need to be interested in the exact same thing as you, but that believe that you can do it is really important, and people that inspire you. And I think that that is one of the things that I also get from you all as some of our volunteers, especially when we get to do things like this. So thank you so much to Global Changemakers for giving us this opportunity. And do feel free, if you've taken anything from this today, do feel free to reach out if we can help in any way, because we love hearing from people that want us to help, and if we can, we will. So yeah, we're at YouthSTEM 2030 on both Twitter and Instagram, and you can visit our website at www.youthstem2030.org. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in today, and hope you have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Oh no!
Sorry, is there any chance you can get us a recording of this? Just because It's gonna be so
We need
incredible.
this. No.
Well, I am gonna have to apologize.
You're not being
Which one of us is gonna laugh?
If there wasn't more than one of us, it would be fine. But because there's lots of us, then it's like I feel like everybody's like on the verge of laughter, which then
I was trying so hard to
You know
not
what?
laugh.
I'm gonna mute myself just in case. Alright?
Yeah, same. But
Is this gonna be like this the whole time?
no, it can't be. Right,
Because if it's going to be like this, then
right. So for the
I'm sorry, I just keep looking at Alvina, and whenever she comes back up,
sorry.
okay,
guys, we have to get this done today.
right. I'm sorry. I'm
No,
gone.
No, just
Okay.
take a deep breath and forget about everything. Yeah, okay.
I think it's a sensible one. Right, let's go for this.